May 28th, hard evidence shows how badly the GBC misunderstood and got the May 28th meeting all wrong. Just after this meeting was over, most likely on the very same day or just minutes after, one of the 5 or 6 men who were in that, who attended the meeting with Srila Prabhupada, authored a handwritten official report allegedly documenting their understanding, or more correctly stated, what was obviously their misunderstanding of the answers that Srila Prabhupada gave to the questions the GBC had asked. Originally, I thought it must have been Tamal who wrote this GBC report, and I don't know for sure. So it may still have been him, but on later research, it appears that the most likely person to have written this report was Satsvarup, who was acting as the secretary for the GBC at the time. Also, from looking at the handwriting on the report, and just Tamal's signature, and just the signature of Satsvarup Prabhu, it appears to me, anyway, that it is Satsvarup's handwriting who wrote the report. But I have no training. I've had no training in handwriting analysis. And the only thing I'm basing it on is his signature. So, but he was also the very first of the GBC to sign the report. And surprisingly, Tamal Krishna didn't even sign it at all. But this may be because Tamal Krishna may have been too tied up at the time taking care of Srila Prabhupada, who was very ill. And as he was acting as Srila Prabhupada's personal secretary and assisting him as his personal servant as well. And regardless of who wrote it, this handwritten record became the original official GBC record of that meeting. What this report reveals is just how confoundedly and totally wrong these 5 to 6 men were regarding what they thought Srila Prabhupada had said. In my analysis of the May 28th meeting, I have many times stated that the GBC missed the most vital parts that Srila Prabhupada was making. This report provides hard documented evidence supporting those claims. This report vividly shows us what these men did not hear and how badly they misunderstood what they did hear Srila Prabhupada say. What is most important to understand in our analysis of this issue is that it is these very same glaringly flawed and outrightly wrong handwritten report. It was presented to the entire GBC as the official record as to what Srila Prabhupada's last and final instructions were on this most grave topic. And it was this report that the entire GBC at that time based all of their decisions and views on regarding this issue for many years to come. Only, let's just say 6 men, GBC men, attended this meeting. For them and the remaining members of the GBC, it is this very report that formed the basis of what they thought Srila Prabhupada's system was that he wanted for initiations for after he departs. As I have already documented, prior to the delegation going into Srila Prabhupada's room on May 28th, members of the GBC who were in Vrindavan met and wrote a handwritten list of topics and questions they felt were important to ask Srila Prabhupada in order to learn his final answers on those topics before he departs. The questions appear to be written by the same person who wrote the report after the meeting. And as I said, Satsvarup was acting as the GBC, secretary to the GBC at the time. So it's most likely it was him who wrote both. On the screen to my right, wait a minute. On the screen to my right? Okay. On the screen to my right, and well, that for you, the viewer, is going to be on your left, is a copy of the 2 questions pertaining to this issue. They're highlighted. On the screen to your right, which is my left anyway, is a copy of the handwritten official GBC recorded notes of the May 28th meeting. Note the signatures of the 18 GBC men who were in Vrindavan on May 28th who signed these handwritten GBC minutes. It is a bit peculiar that Tamal Krishna didn't sign this, since he was not only one of the 5 or 6 men who attended the meeting, but he was also actively asking the questions. But as I said, it may be because he was simply too busily occupied in attending to Srila Prabhupada's needs at the time when the other GBC men were signing this. Another signature that was missing was that of Bhavananda, which according to the recording, according to the BBT's archives, they show him as being the 6th person in the meeting. But for some reason, he also didn't sign this report. Maybe he was tied up doing something else when the report was being passed around to be signed. The highlighted section is what the GBC report claims was Srila Prabhupada's response to the questions regarding initiation. The GBC formal minutes reads as follows. Srila Prabhupada said he will appoint several devotees who shall perform initiation in the future, even after his disappearance. The disciples they accept will be their disciples, and Srila Prabhupada will be their grand spiritual master. Whoa. Wait a minute. No, not that whoa, not WHOA, meaning to whoa your horses, although that may also apply. No, I meant WOE. Yes, that woe is the biblical word woe, like woe unto you, or woe unto me, or really woe unto all of us. This handwritten note is the GBC's original and official record of what they understood or what they thought was Srila Prabhupada's final instructions regarding how he wanted initiations conducted after he departs. This report was signed by 18 of the GBC members who were in Vrindavan, at least 18 of them who were in Vrindavan at the time, indicating their full acceptance and agreement as to the accuracy and the validity of this report. This handwritten statement became the very basis of the GBC's views regarding this issue. It is glaringly obvious that this report is just wrong. It is lacking the most important statements. It is outright misleading. Yet the message stated here in this summary became the very foundation of the multi-guru path that the GBC would take ISKCON down after Srila Prabhupada departed this world. Whoever wrote this report made many grave and serious mistakes and omissions. And really, whoever did write it is nearly single-handedly responsible for causing the GBC to get this whole Ritvik Guru issue wrong and have been taking us down the wrong path. The only good thing this report provides us is that it gives us documented, hard evidence, hard proof, just how badly these men were mistaken and how seriously they totally misunderstood what Srila Prabhupada had said. For the majority of the GBC members who didn't attend the meeting, they had no other information to go on other than this official GBC record for them to know what Srila Prabhupada actually said or what they thought he had actually said. And at the time, they had no reason to question it. They accepted it as being faithful to Srila Prabhupada's wishes and instructions. Thus, the basic ideas expressed in this report became the very foundation of the GBC's long-standing views on this most important issue. This report illustrates the classic analogy that Srila Prabhupada gave, that when adding up a list of numbers If the first two you add together and you make a mistake, then it doesn't matter if the remaining equation has no other mistakes, the results are going to be wrong. Because this report was wrong, then all of the other decisions and the system that the GBC made that were based on this report, all of it has just been totally wrong. By Krishna's arrangement, however, the meeting was recorded and the audio recording has been preserved so that today we can hear for ourselves the actual conversation. From the transcripts of the recording, we can also read what Srila Prabhupada actually said. So the GBC, this official report was a report for the May 28th meeting. And for years, the GBC report, that official report, was the only hard evidence that the rest of the GBC had for what they thought Srila Prabhupada wanted. By the time the GBC had access to the transcripts, there was dissension growing amongst the devotees, calling their interpretation of this meeting wrong and faulty. But the GBC felt obligated that they thought that this is what Srila Prabhupada had wanted. So the GBC stuck by the path they had taken, and they rejected any other opposing understanding of what Srila Prabhupada is really saying or wanted. But to best understand this issue and how the GBC accidentally and mistakenly took us down the wrong path, let's analyze the report and compare it to what Srila Prabhupada actually said. Then we can see just how far off this report was. Let me forewarn that many of the points we will be making here have already been made in the analysis of the meeting itself. But we will now be making them as they relate to the report and how and why the GBC chose to take the path they took on this faulty and misleading report, based on this report. The main reason why I'm going to repeat some of what I've already stated is to keep the timelines separate. We have already discussed the actual May 28th meeting itself, and now I want to focus on the official report. Because if it's also of such importance, it deserves taking the time to analyze it separately. Now recall, before I read these questions off, recall that Prabhupada had been speaking to Tamal about the Ridvik system several days before this meeting, several days before they wrote these questions down. So the question, especially number 3, is not asking about the procedure for a normal, regular initiation. So the GBC knew how to, what the procedure was for a regular initiation. They're specifically asking Srila Prabhupada about that Ridvik system that he had been talking to Tamal about and Tamal had told them about. So that is the nature of these questions. They are to confirm with Srila Prabhupada what that system was, how the procedures were to be done in that system, and what is the relationship of the person who conducts those ceremonies, what's his relation to the person who's getting initiated. That was what their questions were. Now let's read how they wrote them. 3, in the absence of Srila Prabhupada. Notice that the question is only directed for after Srila Prabhupada departs. They weren't even interested in what's going to happen in the present before he departs. Because now they're saying the Ridvik system was only about in the presence while Prabhupada was present and not about after. But notice the question was only, they were only interested in the absence of Srila Prabhupada. 3, in the absence of Srila Prabhupada, what is the procedure for first, second, and sannyas initiations? 4, what is the relationship of the person who gives this initiation, this Ridvik initiation, to the person he gives it to? That is the nature of those questions. They weren't asking about the present, and the Ridvik system, when Srila Prabhupada answered, was in regards to question number 3, which was specifically in the absence of Srila Prabhupada. Of course, the way Satsvarup changed the questions, when he asked number 3, he used different wording, but the meaning is very close to the same. He asked, then our next question concerns initiations in the future, particularly at that time when you're no longer with us. We want to know how first and second initiation would be conducted. After the meeting, the GBC members were presented with this report. On the screen are the handwritten list of questions related to this topic that were asked to Srila Prabhupada, alongside the handwritten report of what allegedly was Srila Prabhupada's final and settled up answer to those questions. Actually, we'll move it over so they're side by side. Following along as I read the questions, along with the corresponding answers, this report allegedly says that Srila Prabhupada was Srila Prabhupada's response. Keep in mind that this was what the GBC in 1977 was presented with. And this is how they would have understood it. Okay. In the absence of Srila Prabhupada, what is the procedure for first and second? So remember, they didn't, in the report, the list of questions that were to be asked, that's all they had. And in the report, it doesn't say that Satsvarup changed the question. So all that we know is, or all the GBC knew was, that the response to question number 3, they didn't know the question had been changed. All they knew is that these 2 questions were asked, and only these 2 questions, and these were his response to it. They didn't know that there was all these other questions that they kept asking, well, who's disciple and all these different things, So they just thought that these 2 questions were asked and that this was his response to these 2 questions. So they thought the first question was, in the absence of Srila Prabhupada, what is the procedure for first, second, and sannyasa initiations? Answer. Srila Prabhupada said he will appoint several devotees who shall perform initiation in the future, even after his disappearance. Back to the second question, which is number 4 in the list. What is the relationship of the person who gives this initiation to the person he gives it to? Answer. The disciples they accept will be their disciples, and Srila Prabhupada will be their grand spiritual master. You can see how these 2 questions that were asked and then the report seems to correlate, and it looks like the GBC only asked those 2 questions, and those were his 2 responses. But really, is this supposed to have been a faithful representation of what Srila Prabhupada actually said? It's not at all close. Not by a very long shot, not by a wide country mile, not by 1,000 country miles. It's just plain outright completely lacking and misleading. It misses the most all-important points. So now what we're going to show is that we have the handwritten report, and to the far right is a transcript of this part of the meeting, which displays what Srila Prabhupada actually said. In brackets, I've added some of the words that Tamal and Satsvarup spoke for added clarity. I'll read through it quickly. After this is settled up, I shall recommend some of you to act. Now, this is what Srila Prabhupada was, his reply, what his actual reply was. After this is settled up, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna, is that called Ritvik Acharya? Ritvik, yes. Satsvarup, what is the relationship of that person who gives the initiation? And he's Guru. Satsvarup, but he does it on your behalf. Yes, that is formality, because in my presence one should not become Guru. So on my behalf, on my order, Amara Agnaya Guruhana, be actually Guru, but by my order. They're their disciples. Who will consider? Who? Tamal Krishna. The people who they give diksha to. Whose disciples are they? They're his disciple, who is initiating, his grand disciple. When I order you become guru, he becomes regular guru. That's all. He becomes disciple of my disciple. Now let me read what the GBC report of what it says Srila Prabhupada said. Srila Prabhupada said he will appoint several devotees who shall perform initiation in the future, even after his disappearance. The disciples they accept will be their disciples, and Srila Prabhupada will be their grand spiritual master. To make the transcript of what Srila Prabhupada actually said more or less equal to what the GBC report says he said, I am highlighting in blue text the words that will have to be eliminated. So amazingly, as you can see, these are the most important words and instructions that Srila Prabhupada spoke and that he gave. Now I will simply remove all those words that the report left out. After removing what was left out of the report, and after adding in one line in red that Srila Prabhupada clearly did not speak, we have, I shall recommend some of you to be actually guru, even after my disappearance. They're his disciple, my grand disciple. He becomes regular guru. That's all. He becomes disciple of my disciple. The text in red that I added, even after my disappearance, Satsvarupa, the person who wrote this report, added that they would initiate their own disciples even after his disappearance. Srila Prabhupada didn't say this at all in the meeting. I also note that even after his disappearance implies that these men will also perform regular initiations even before his disappearance. And I would hope that this is not what the author intended to say. I will give the author the benefit of a doubt and assume that what he intended to write was that Srila Prabhupada will select some men who will initiate after his disappearance, removing the word even. The second sentence supposedly would be Srila Prabhupada's answer to the GBC's number 4 question, the second one they asked on this topic. The report says that the disciples they accept will be their disciples. Coming back up on the screen are the words and instructions spoken by Srila Prabhupada that this report totally left out. Here's what this report left out. After this is settled up, act as officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna, is that called Ritvik Acharya? Ritvik, yes. Because in my presence, one should not become guru. So on my behalf, on my order, Amara Agnaya Gurahana, but by my order, when I order, you become guru. The GBC report left out the most important words and instructions that Srila Prabhupada actually gave. The very first words and point that the report totally left out are the 5 keywords. These 5 keywords would have changed the entire understanding of the response that Srila Prabhupada was giving that day. After this is settled up, these 5 words, they just change everything. These 5 words tell us that this issue, this question that was asked of him on that day, this was not settled yet as of May 28th. What these words were intended by Srila Prabhupada to inform these men that this was not and he could not give a final answer to this question that day. That would have to wait until after this is settled up. If the person who had written this report had included the purport of these 5 keywords, it would have changed everything. If the report had faithfully stated that when Srila Prabhupada was asked how initiations were to be conducted after he departs, and his reply was that he had not settled this yet, but after he has settled it, then he will select some men to act as officiating acharyas, who he then said were Ritviks, then the rest of the GBC would have reached a totally different conclusion, and they would have made totally different decisions, especially where they reached a different conclusion concerning the July 9th letter. This was the most important point of his response to their first question. If this was included in the report, then the entire GBC body would have understood that he did not give any settled up answer to that question, not on that day, and they would have to wait until after this was settled to know his final and settled up answers. How will they know when Srila Prabhupada has settled what he wants? Srila Prabhupada told them after this is settled, then he will recommend some of the GBC to act as officiating acharyas or officiating Ritvik acharyas. That is what should have been written in the report, because that is what Srila Prabhupada actually said. That was his actual response to their first question. His response to that question was that it wasn't that he would soon select men who would become regular gurus. Obviously, that is not what he said in answer to that first question. 5.5 weeks later, after this date, Srila Prabhupada had a document written in which he selected 11 men to act as his Ritvik representatives, and in that document, he gave the details of how those initiations were to be conducted. In other words, in that letter, which he gave 5.5 weeks after the May 28th meeting, that is when he informed the GBC that this issue as to how these initiations were to be conducted after he departs, it wasn't settled until 5.5 weeks later within that letter. That is where he gave his settled up instructions. And he gave it in a formal document with his signature. If these 5 words, along with the fact that Srila Prabhupada said he would be selecting officiating Ritviks or Ritvik acharyas, would have been, this would have prompted the GBC, if they had been included in this report, then this would have prompted the GBC to have then accepted the July 9th letter as the system that he actually wanted for after he departs. This is why I refer to these 5 words as the 5 key words that unlock the answers to this issue. That's why I say these 5 words change everything. By having omitted these 5 key words and their purport from this report, the GBC had no clue that Srila Prabhupada had not given his complete or settled up answer to that question this day. The next words and instructions that this report leaves out is in regards to the unique titles that Srila Prabhupada gave concerning those who would conduct the initiation ceremonies after he departs. Srila Prabhupada had said that he would soon select some men who would act as officiating acharyas. And he says that that will be, that is the same as Ritvik acharyas. In the GBC report, it says that he would soon select some men who would be regular gurus. Just see how wrong that report was, how misleading it was, how mistaken it was, how faulty it was. So Srila Prabhupada said that he would soon select some men who would act as officiating acharyas. And in his books, Srila Prabhupada has used this word officiate in reference to those who would conduct official duties on behalf of an office, on behalf of the actual person who was not present at the time. For example, when Indra was absent from his post, another demigod officiated on his behalf. When Yamaraj was not present, another sage would officiate on his behalf. This title, officiating acharya, was unique. Srila Prabhupada had never used it before or after. It was given as the title for those who would officiate on his behalf regarding initiations when he was no longer present. He would select some men to act to officiate on his behalf. When Tamal asked if these officiating acharyas were the same as Ritvik acharyas, Srila Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada had been discussing just days earlier, Srila Prabhupada replied in the affirmative, Ritvik, yes. This title, officiating acharyas, who were also be known as Ritviks, was left out of this official report. This is vital and important information. The rest of the GBC should have been made aware of it. By omitting this from the report, the rest of the GBC body had no clue that those who would conduct initiation ceremonies after he departs were to be known as officiating Ritviks. Therefore, and they didn't know that the Prabhupada had not yet settled how he wanted those initiations to be conducted. Therefore, when Srila Prabhupada gave the names of the 11 Ritvik representatives in the July 9th letter, the GBC did not take them to be representatives for after he departs, but they concluded that they could only be before he departs. But the May 28th question specifically targeted for how those initiations would be conducted after he departs. Srila Prabhupada was reply with, he couldn't answer that question yet because it wasn't fully settled, but that he would settle it when he selects the officiating acharyas, implying that they would be representing him. They would be officiating on his behalf, and that he referred to them by the word Ritvik. That was most significant. And by omitting this from the report, the GBC was ill-informed. They were misinformed. And therefore, they made all wrong decisions when the July 9th letter came out. Instead of the official report saying that Srila Prabhupada would soon select devotees to act as Ritviks, officiating Ritviks, instead, whoever wrote this report said he would soon select devotees who would perform the initiations and that they would be regular gurus initiating their own disciples. It's just totally wrong. It's totally misleading. And the other most important words and instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave were also glaringly omitted from this report. And they were, on my order, but by my order. When I order, you become guru. These were the most significant instructions that Srila Prabhupada, His Divine Grace, gave regarding this issue, especially regarding how anyone would become an actual guru. They informed that Srila Prabhupada's order must be given before anyone can become an actual or regular guru. If these vitally important words were properly included in this report, the GBC would have been aware that Srila Prabhupada's order would have to be given before anyone would be taken as an actual guru. If they were anticipating that Srila Prabhupada would select men to become the next regular gurus who would take their own disciples, the GBC would have been looking for and aware that Srila Prabhupada's direct order would still have to be given first. In place of these words, informing that it is on his order that one can become guru, this report substituted the word after his disappearance. This was a catastrophic failure to not only dismiss and not include at all Srila Prabhupada's instruction that it is on his order, but by his order, when he orders, that one can become a regular guru. But on top of just leaving these most important words out, they replace on my order with basically on my disappearance. This is just wrong in the strongest of terms. By omitting these all-important key words and instructions, this report by the GBC was a blundering, catastrophic calamity in the first degree. It completely and totally misrepresented what Srila Prabhupada had actually said that day. And yet this report, it is all that the rest of the GBC had to go on for years. This totally flawed and mistaken report is all that the rest of the GBC had in order to base their views on, their critical decisions on regarding this issue and what they thought Srila Prabhupada had actually instructed and what he desired regarding this issue. In Srila Prabhupada's response to question number 4, which is the second question on this topic, Srila Prabhupada never mentions anything about Ritviks initiating their own disciples, unless, of course, he also gives his order to a Ritvik and asks and orders him to become an actual guru. But he never said that the Ritviks he would soon name would take their own disciples. That was taken from when he was speaking about the persons who he will have given his order to become regular guru. These are entirely two separate entities and two separate topics. What this report shows is the person who wrote this report, they cut out the most vital and important instructions Srila Prabhupada gave. And for some reason, that person thought that those instructions and those words were just not important. Then they like copied just the words that they wanted to hear, from the first half of the conversation regarding Ritviks, and then they copied words that they wanted to hear, selected words from what Srila Prabhupada said regarding actual gurus, and those will he have given his order to, and they pasted these two separate topics together and came up with something totally other than what Srila Prabhupada had actually said or wanted. But just see how wrong and misleading this report was. The report clearly does not reflect what Srila Prabhupada was actually saying or what system he actually wanted. What this report should have stated is as follows. 3, in the absence of Srila Prabhupada, what is the procedure for first, second, and sannyasa initiations? Answer. Srila Prabhupada deferred any final answer until after this is settled up. At that time, he will recommend some men to act as Ritvik acharyas, and they will initiate on Srila Prabhupada's behalf. Number 4, what is the relationship of this person who gives this initiation to the person he gives it to? Since this question is so poorly worded, the question itself is totally misleading. The person who gives initiation is the guru, and the person who he initiates as his disciple. The question wasn't asking about the relationship of the officiating Ritvik who performs the ceremony. It was actually asking about the actual guru. So the question itself is misleading. However, what the report should have stated is that Srila Prabhupada had stated 3 times that his order must be given before one can become actual regular guru. Once he has given that order, that person will initiate their own disciples. My personal assessment. It is obvious that whoever wrote this report missed all the most important words and instructions that Srila Prabhupada spoke. They misunderstood what he was saying. To be so wrong about this, that person had to be under the influence of Maya. Previously, we have pointed out that this very well could have been Lord Krishna's Yoga Maya. But just as with Karna, Krishna could have informed the Pandavas and Duryodhana who Karna really was. And by doing so, that would have prevented the Pandavas from so much tribulation. But Krishna chose a different outcome. Why? God only knows. But we can't just blame our own personal shortcomings on Krishna. Krishna didn't force Dhritarashtra, Sakuni, or Duryodhana to be so envious. Their envious nature and the actions it spurred is on them. This is why it is said that with our limited minds, we can never understand the intricate workings of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He does one action and so many actions ensue. And so many reasons are just behind one simple action by Lord Krishna. Even if Lord Sri Krishna allowed or even wanted that ISKCON for decades would go down the wrong path, and therefore it was he who made the arrangements for this to happen, because this is the material world and it is Kali Yuga. At the same time, he would not have chosen someone to make those mistakes if that person had not their own strong material desires that they were desiring to fulfill. The same with Sakuni or Dhritarashtra, etc. They may have ultimately assisted in carrying out what Krishna ultimately wanted, but they played the parts they did because of their own enviousness. Krishna selected them to carry out their roles because that is where they were at spiritually. Therefore, their bad actions are due to their fallen nature. Yes, Satsvarup and Tamal and others who wrote and upheld this lacking and misleading report may have done so ultimately, carrying out Krishna's plan, but that doesn't mean they were without fault. No, they were in Maya, due to their own shortcomings. Lord Krishna had also put Arjuna under his Yoga Maya spell, but that wasn't due to Arjuna's shortcomings. Then you might ask, why do I say that regarding these men it was due to their shortcomings? Because it is simple to see the differences. With Arjuna, Krishna only put him under the illusion for just a few minutes, while Krishna could speak the Gita and dispel his very temporary illusions immediately. Arjuna was under the influence of Yoga Maya for only a few minutes. And while he was under Yoga Maya's influence, it did not adversely affect anyone else. No one else suffered because of his being placed temporarily under Krishna's Yoga Maya spell. Rather, it was due to his being under this very temporary illusion of Yoga Maya that allowed Krishna to speak his Bhagavad Gita philosophy, which has been to the greatest benefit for all of mankind for this entire age. So Arjuna's being under Yoga Maya for a few minutes resulted in the greatest benefit for all of mankind for this entire age. Only positive results came from his being under this temporary influence of Krishna's internal delusioning potency Yoga Maya. And that is not the case with these men. Due to their being under the influence of Maya, they made huge blunders, which set ISKCON down the wrong path for decades. Their illusion, mistakes, and misunderstandings have adversely affected so many people for so many years. So no, there is no comparison at all between these men's Maha Maya illusions and that of Arjuna's Yoga Maya-induced illusions. The facts that the person who wrote this report and those who heard this completely missed and left out the most important words and instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave is due to those persons having strong mundane desires to want to have become guru, and all for the mundane reasons, namely adoration, prestige, distinction, control, lording it over others. Arjuna was completely and totally devoid of any such desires. It is those very desires that will place one under the influence of Mahamaya. Under such delusional influence, one's hearing, one's memory, one's judgments all begin to reflect what that person desires to hear, what they want to remember and want to think. It appears that this is what took place with the person who wrote this report and those who were there and signed off on it, including Tamal, who was there, but actually he didn't sign off on the report. I do fully accept that the person who wrote this went into this meeting with the honest, sincere desire to find out what Srila Prabhupada's final answers were. And I accept that they wanted to report it as he said it, as what they thought he really wanted. I don't go along with the idea that any of the GBC at that time wanted to purposefully hijack Srila Prabhupada's mission and wanted to intentionally mislead everyone on purpose just so that they could become guru. At least not at this time on May 28th. However, because they did want that, they had that strong desire, they made mistakes and they misunderstood and they produced a totally misleading, completely wrong report. And then later, after Srila Prabhupada selected the 11 men who he selected as Ritviks, but these men mistakenly thought that they were to become regular gurus after Prabhupada departs, then this idea of becoming the next successor guru in our disciplic line, it got to these men's heads because they already had strong desires for adoration, strong desires to want to lord it over others. So after that, then some of them began to take actions to make sure that this was the path that the other GBC men accepted, and took deliberate actions to start misleading others. But that came about later. And that was still based on this faulty report. Here on May 28th, these men entered into this meeting wanting to learn of and faithfully report what Srila Prabhupada had said. And with such good intent in mind, how could the person who wrote this make such glaring omissions and reach such wrong conclusions? Wrong conclusions. Because underlying that pure desire was that strong desire to want to lord it over others, to want to become adored and become the next main acharya. These desires influenced this person, and Tamal included, so that they only heard and remembered what they wanted to hear and remember. As I have previously stated, it appears that the author of this report was most likely Satsvarup Goswami. In the 1970s, when Srila Prabhupada was still present, I saw him many times when he came to the LA temple. Most likely, he will remember who I am, and I obviously know who he was. But I never served directly under him or with him on any project, so I have no direct and personal experiences with him, either good or bad. Rather, back in 1977, I respected him as a leading senior devotee, and I considered him to be a very fortunate soul to have had the blessings of having so much of Srila Prabhupada's personal association. The only black spot was when I found out that he had joined with Rameshwar in lying to us about Srila Prabhupada's personal request for all of us to come to Vrindavan. See my personal story about what I'm talking about there, and refer back to that. But in the mid to late 1990s, I had a somewhat disturbing interaction with Satsvarup, where he revealed, at least on a totally different topic that I had raised with him, that in regards to that topic, he showed a total disregard for what Srila Prabhupada actually said. I was very disturbed by this at the time. In my interaction with him, he clearly showed that he was only concerned in presenting his personal views on that particular topic, even when he knew that those views were not the views that Srila Prabhupada had taught. And that he was willing to do this to the point of making a misleading claim in one of his books where he stated that his, Satsvarup's opposing view was actually Srila Prabhupada's view, when he knew that it wasn't. As I said, this was in regard to a totally different topic. That topic is one in which a number of people, including many of Prabhupada's followers, consider controversial. But just because it is a controversial topic doesn't mean that it's okay to lie to others and tell them that Srila Prabhupada was against that topic, when in reality that person knows that Srila Prabhupada wasn't. This clearly showed to me how far Satsvarup was willing to go to push his own personal agenda and his own views over and above those of Srila Prabhupada. As I said, it was a totally different topic, and that many see that topic as controversial. So I have made a separate ancillary note. Satsvarup remembers only what he wants. So you can click on that if you want to view it. Now this ends our examination of the GBC's record of the May 28th meeting. Actually, I am going to take a break now. And in fact, this is going to be the end of where I have added in and made changes. I'm going to go back to what I recorded a few months ago for the rest of the presentation. All right, Hare Krishna.